Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Gary Moore. And I've had a lot of requests for Gary, and I did feature him in a 3-for-all last year that kind of looked at some of his, lead style and licks. And this is going to be a chord-based approach and kind of hone in on some of his habits and, chord preferences and progressions and things like that. And Gary, of course, the late great, Irish guitar legend, influenced, generations of guitarists that kind of followed in his footsteps. And he definitely had a very signature, tone, and attack, and feel. A very energetic player, just a biting, guitar approach. And that's probably the best way to describe his style. Is just very impactful and biting, when he would play. And this lesson's going to reveal kind of his softer side, I guess, in a way, and some of the chord progressions and cycle progressions that he used in a lot of his music. And he did a lot with, chords. He did a lot with power chords and some blues, kind of rhythms. But this is going to focus on cycle progressions. And if you're not really sure what that is, then this is a good lesson for you. Just shared that image with some quotes, related to Gary, and those were interesting quotes. But I think the one from Bob Daisley is the most interesting because Gary was Ozzy's first choice. After he was booted out of Black Sabbath, he wanted Gary Moore, and Gary turned him down. And then, in the first Michael Schenker 3-for-all that I made, I mentioned in there that Ozzy also wanted Michael Schenker, and Michael Schenker turned him down. And both Gary and Michael were a little afraid of Ozzy's kind of, crazy days post-Sabbath. And he kind of had a little bit of a bad reputation with alcohol and drugs and stuff like that, and wild man antics. And it wasn't until Dana Strum, who, played with Vinnie Vincent Invasion and eventually the band Slaughter. Dana Strum was actually the one that introduced, Randy to Ozzy Osbourne. And it's obvious Ozzy was trying to find somebody, and he wanted somebody really good, so he went to Gary, and then Michael Schenker, and then eventually found Randy Rhoads. So I always thought that was kind of interesting that that was his number one choice, after Sabbath. He was like, no, I want Gary Moore. I mentioned cycle progressions a moment ago, and just to kind of clear the air as far as what that is, this is a very common thing you can hear in classical music, and you can hear it in rock and pop and jazz and a lot of different styles of music. And the cycle, really, you can move in thirds, fourths, fifths, even sixths are pretty common, to kind of move through a cycle progression. And as we dig deeper into some of these examples and chord progressions, and you kind of see what we're doing, this entire lesson is going to revolve around the key of A minor. And it just so happens that the, 5 songs that I've selected are kind of, coming from the same kind of idea or approach. And Gary definitely kind of fleshed this out during his career. And here's a quote from him referring to these progressions. With the opening, that was Victims of the Future, and from the album, from the same name, very popular and influential, Gary Moore solo album. And this is going to begin this kind of cycle progression discussion that we're going to hit in this lesson. And in this particular song, there's 3 different flavors of A, and then kind of a slash chord, in the key of D. So it's not the complete cycle progression that I was talking about earlier that moves either in thirds, fourths, fifths, or sixths. This is really just kind of a repeating cycle of chords. And the progression, we've got A sus2, and then A sus2 flat 13. And then you're going to move that shape up a whole step, and then that's going to change that to an A7 sus2. And then you've got this D over A right here, like a D sus2 over A. So it's a 4-chord, progression or cycle. A sus2, A sus2 flat 13, A7 sus2, and then D sus2 over A. And definitely that chord progression, it reminds me of a lot of 80s, kind of acoustic rock and some of those slower kind of 80s rock tunes. And I think Gary kind of influenced a lot of those players, that you hear playing things that sound like that, whether it was Tesla or Dokken or someone like that, Rat or whoever, you can kind of hear some of those tonalities, in other music after Gary, came out with Victims of the Future. But then he's arpeggiating through this, and I'm playing this obviously on a nylon string guitar. Some of these examples were actually performed on nylon string, when Gary recorded it. Some of them are steel string acoustic, and some are just a clean tone, with an electric. But I chose to hit a nylon string just to keep everything really clean. That way you can kind of hear everything clearly. And it's up to you. You can play it on an acoustic guitar, with steel strings, nylon string, or an electric. But as far as the arpeggio, he's really just going up and down those first two chords. So A sus2 up and down, and then the A sus2 flat 13 up and down, and then the A7 sus2, it's a little different, and then the D sus2 over A is kind of straight up and down, basically just kind of going straight up right there. That little single note pattern in there after the repeat, and then starts that cycle again. Alright, up next is the song One Day, which is from the Ballads and Blues album, and it looks like this. See, it starts there with A minor, and then A minor over G, and then D minor 7, and then G7, a little piece of C major 7, and then F major 7, and then B minor 7, and then E7 right there. Once again, we have this kind of repeated cycle of chords. That A minor kind of moving down to the G, and then the D minor 7, G7, C major 7, F major 7, that B minor 7, and then finally E7. So it's floating through A minor, and then right at the very end, he's hitting, the 5 chord, which is changed to a dominant 7. And that's implying harmonic minor. And we've talked about that a lot on this channel and in the Chordplay series. And that's, signaling harmonic minor. But Gary typically would stay within, like minor pentatonic and blues scales. He also liked Aeolian a lot, the natural minor scale. And it was kind of rare for him to just dive into harmonic minor. And that's kind of more Yngwie or Ola John Roth, territory. But he definitely liked flirting with that progression, bringing out that major 7, or the dominant 7 rather, like an A minor right there. The next example is the very famous Parisienne Walkways from Back on the Streets, and it looks like this. Now it's going to start once again with A minor, and then D minor 7, and then D minor 7 over G, and then C major 7, and he kind of splits the chord like this, and then F major, the sinister B minor 7 flat 5 right here. And he kind of ends with this E7, and once again he kind of splits the chord into 2 parts. And then just end on A. So that chord progression is basically diving into a cycle of fifths, and not the circle of fifths or fourths. It's the cycle of fifths. And we're descending technically. So in the key of A or A minor, if we descend and kind of check out those bass notes, the easiest way to see it is just think of power chord shapes here on the low E and A. And we're moving from A down to D. And then G is moving down to C. And then F moving to B. And then E finally is followed by A again. And we start the cycle over. And that's basically what's happening behind the scenes in that progression. It's really interesting, to notice that's what's happening. Just that cycle of notes. Up next is the song Nothing's the Same, which is from the After Hours album, and you'll see that this is kind of a variation of Parisienne Walkways. It's using some of the same progression that we just had, but he throws a couple curveballs in and changes and kind of modifies a few of the chords, like this. So once again, we're starting on A minor, which definitely Gary seemed very fond of A minor and kind of exploring, these cycle progressions in that key. Now the pattern of the progression is a little different, and also the picking pattern's different compared to Parisienne Walkways, but it's something like this. Change that D minor 7. D minor 7 over G, and then that E7 over G sharp, and then A minor, and right there with that little piece of A minor and the little piece of G9, and then F major 7, D minor 7, D minor 6, and then that E7. Cool, and it's interesting to see those little modifications to the progression from Parisienne in a completely different song. The last example is from Still Got the Blues, which comes from the album with the same name, and you can definitely see this is related to Parisienne Walkways once again. And he starts on D minor 7, so he kind of bypasses the A minor at the beginning, and he's only repeating each chord once in the cycle, but it does follow that same cycle of fifths progression, something like this. There you can see we're starting with E minor 7, D minor 7 over G, C major 7, F major 7, and then there's that twisted B minor 7 flat 5 again, to E, and then just finish with A minor. Second time through, he kind of does that ascending, bass note where it's A minor over B, A minor over C, which that's really cool. And then he repeats the whole cycle again. It's going to wrap this look at the chords of Gary Moore, and like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you can play these songs and examples on electric guitar with a clean tone, steel string acoustic, or a nylon string. I just chose nylon string to keep it kind of simple and keep everything kind of pure so you can really kind of hear and notice the little differences between these progressions. And if you have a friend that can maybe play through these chords, or you have a looper, or you can record yourself, loop the chord progression and just kind of do that cycle and just get that kind of dreamlike hypnotic, sequence. And then grab your electric guitar or an acoustic and solo over, those progressions, and listen to how the chords kind of pull you towards, certain notes, and you might find yourself playing a little bit differently or targeting things over those chords a little bit differently. And it's fun, to really challenge yourself and throw out, a large progression of chords, and then just experiment with melodic ideas and licks and soloing. And who knows, you might write your own variation of these cycle progressions. So leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.